Salaryman is summoned by the Demon King to serve as his celestial king in another world. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. The Demon King summons someone to be one of the 4 great generals of his army. The woman's name is Ulmandra, the Aggressor of Hell. Next, the king summons Sylphid, the Archmage of the Storm. After that, Gnome, the Crust Barrier. Finally, the Demon Lord announces he will bring forth the one who will become a pivotal force in conviction in the army, a soul summoned from another world, the vessel of the 4 generals who controls water. His name is Denisuke Uchimura, the overseas manager. After this mythological introduction, startled by everything, the human gives a timid hello to the group. As far as he knew, Uchimura was just an insignificant employee at Teo Works Corporation. He had survived the hellish phase of job hunting and started his job full of hope. However, while his colleagues were being promoted, he went unrecognized. Then suddenly, he was ordered to transfer overseas for a factory construction plan. According to some colleagues, the manager had pulled some strings and dumped this problem on Uchimura. Despite all this, the young man remained loyal to his job and still believed things would get better. When he arrived at his new work post far from Japan, he worked hard. Yet, even as he complained to management that he lacked staff and equipment to do his job, all Uchimura got in return were scoldings from his superiors, as if he were wasting the company's money. Over time, Denisuke endured until things slightly improved, but just as everything started working, he received news of another transfer. Sometime later at his new destination, the man wondered why he worked so hard. Amid these reflections, poor Uchimura is also hit by a motorcycle and loses his life. From there, we know where he ended up. Before him, the Demon King welcomes Denisuke Uchimura and explains that he personally summoned the human to become one of the 4 great generals, the overseas manager. After all, Uchimura was appointed to work abroad, learned the local language, educated the people of the region, and led the new business successfully. Because of this, the Demon King believes this man is ideal for his army. Hearing this, Uchimura is glad that the demon appreciated his work, but he feels that joining the Devil's army seems more like a step back in life than a promotion. At this point, the king informs him that the human will have compensation and authority equivalent to managers on Earth, with the freedom to choose his subordinates and entitlement to a personal office. If he refuses the offer, Denisuke will be sent back to his world. Delighted with the respect for labor rights, the human begins to see the Demon King as a cool guy. Finally, the Underworld Emperor asks what his decision will be. Uchimura starts to recall all the humiliations he suffered on Earth and tells the king that a nobody like him doesn't deserve to work for someone so important. However, the Demon King boosts his morale, saying that he should not let himself be affected by the nonsense people said about him. After all, people only appreciate what they want to and don't value the piano carriers who do all the hard work. However, the Demon King saw the work done by Uchimura and knows his worth. By the way, the Emperor asserts that it's not Uchimura's job to determine whether he has value or not, nor is it the job of his former boss. From now on, that's the duty of the Demon King who summoned Uchimura because he needs him. So it boils down to basic reasoning. Either the human goes back to Earth and is treated like a dog, or he works for the king in a new world where the sky's the limit. However, before Uchimura could rethink, Ulmandra opposes the master's decision, believing that a weak human like him cannot serve as one of the 4 generals. Similarly, Sylphid is against the idea, as is Gnome. In that case, the Demon King proposes to test the summoned man, and the outcome will determine the master's final decision. Uchimura hates the idea, but Ulmandra agrees, especially after hearing that humans from other worlds have special powers, and she wants to test this right now by delivering a deadly kick to Uchimura. The man sees the lay coming his way and starts to bid farewell to his second life, but the Demon King blocks his subordinate's kick and remarks that she gets blind when taken over by emotions. To show the result of the general's rash behavior, the Lord points to Uchimura, who fainted from the shock but is still standing. With this, Ulmandra starts to think that this guy is just a normal human, and the chief explains that he is exactly that. The other generals want to know where the special skills and powerful magics are, but the king reaffirms that Uchimura is just an ordinary guy. Once again, Ulmandra does not want to accept this man as one of the 4 generals, while Gnome recalls that the army is made up of monsters, and if an incompetent human enters a war between demons and demi-humans, he'll be devoured in the blink of an eye. Although Gnome remembers that, in her opinion, it's always the demons who start the fight. Hearing this provocation, Ulmandra starts a fight with her colleagues since, according to her, it's the demi-humans who always complain about everything. Finally, the Demon King acknowledges that there's friction within the military forces, but this is exactly why he summoned Denisuke Uchimura, not for his muscles, but for his talent. Meanwhile, Uchimura wakes up, still thinking he's being attacked, and waves his arms as if that could stop the kick. Taking advantage of the human waking up, the Dark Lord reinforces that the test will be conducted. Regarding this test, the king explains that his army is trying to make a pact with the neighboring clans, namely the Salamander clan and the Werewolf clan. However, negotiations with the Minotaur clan are proving quite difficult, and this is where Uchimura comes in. His first mission is to conclude a pact with the Minotaurs, winning their trust with his negotiation skills to the point of inviting them to join the demon army. If he has any questions, Uchimura should ask his predecessor, Ulmandra. After absorbing those words, Uchimura wandered the halls of that gloomy castle, unable to believe this was happening to him. Lacking patience for the man's drama, Ulmandra told him to stop being a wimp. She made it clear that he wouldn't pass this test. On that point, Uchimura couldn't agree more. After all, he knew he was just a useless employee who couldn't use magic or special skills. Amidst these thoughts, he remembered the Demon King's words about not letting others sway him. Honestly, Uchimura had always wanted to work for a boss who truly needed him and recognized his worth, and the Dark Lord showed that he was that person, if he was a person at all. Eventually, Ulmandra led Uchimura to the room used by the chief of the Minotaur clan, and the man was terrified at the sheer size of the door. Ulmandra warned beforehand that these bulls were quite fierce, and that Uchimura should be careful not to get trampled into a carpet of flesh and skin. With that, she opened the room's door, and although nervous for his test, Uchimura tried to compose himself to do his best. However, as soon as he laid eyes on the gigantic Minotaur, he tucked his tail between his legs, imagining he would indeed become the carpet his co-worker had mentioned. Seeing that the human would need help, Ulmandra told him to observe how negotiations were done there. After saying this, the demoness approached the giant bull, Terius, and asked for a minute of his attention. However, despite the initial calm, she completely lost her composure and grumbled that the Horned One was complaining about the room again, infuriating the big guy. Without delay, the negotiation went south, so Ulmandra took Uchimura outside and explained that the Minotaurs were willing to make a pact, but there was a day when Terius suddenly refused the terms, even though the conversation had been going great. After that, Ulmandra returned several times to finalize the negotiation, but each time that bull refused to talk, and to make matters worse, even tried to bring a bunch of junk to throw in the room. With that said, it was for this reason that the rest of the job would fall to Uchimura, so the demoness left, leaving the man alone. In front of the room with the enormous bull, the human heard all the furious noise from Terius and returned to wandering the corridors with a look of terror on his face. Imagining a negotiation in front of that house-sized creature, a light reflected in Uchimura's eyes, forming the sign of a bar. There the man found himself in that very establishment, sitting down to order the usual from the owner. After wiping his face with the offered towel, Denosuke reflected that if the client refused to negotiate, there was no way to proceed. Meanwhile, as he drank the Demon King's beverage, he remembered a similar situation before. Once, there was a guy who just kept saying no all the time, and Uchimura was about to give up on the negotiation. But when they looked each other in the eye, they somehow understood each other. After reflecting on this, Uchimura set his glass on the counter and left the bar. Back in the castle's corridors, the man straightened his tie and decided he was going to resolve this mess. Meanwhile, Ulmandra reported that Terius continued to refuse to talk and that it would be impossible for the human to turn the situation around. Still, the Demon King insisted that Uchimura be observed for a while longer. Soon, the Demon General went to Terius' room where Uchimura was messing with the Minotaur's trash. She angrily asked what he was doing, and he explained he was going to try a more appropriate conversation with Lord Terius because, even though he was large, size didn't matter in a negotiation. If the conversation went poorly, something was wrong, and the only way to reconcile was by looking into each other's eyes, persisting and building trust. At that moment, the demoness saw that the look of failure had disappeared from the human's face as he entered the bull's room with a bag full of hay. The next day, Ulmandra entered Terius' room worried and saw that the place had turned into a pile of trash. She imagined that the monster had destroyed the man. However, Uchimura showed up and reported that the leader of the Minotaurs was in the process of making an alliance pact with the Demon King. The woman asked how this was possible, and the human said that there's a famous saying: "If you know the enemy and yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." They then went to the throne room, where the pact was about to be sealed. Uchimura told Ulmandra that, in fact, Terius thought the negotiations were going well. He had once been through a similar conversation where the client kept saying no, and he was thinking about giving up. But then that client seemed happy and asked to shake hands with Denosuke because for him, lively and emotional discussions were a good thing. Being from abroad, that was how that man expressed his emotions in his culture. Then, when he looked into the Minotaur's eyes and told him the negotiation was going down the drain, the giant didn't understand why. Apparently, it's a courtesy among Minotaurs to place hay in the rooms they will use because they are large and afraid of breaking any beds. So Terius was sleepy and getting annoyed by not being understood. Then Ulmandra blamed herself for not having been able to understand the visitor, but Terius approached and corrected that the fault was also his for not knowing he was being rude. After the Minotaur left, the Demon King proved that Uchimura sees what others do not. Therefore, he gave the man a bracelet that recognized him as one of the 4 generals. With that, Ulmandra touched her bracelet to Uchimura's and explained that this was how her clan welcomed new friends. After the subordinates left, the Demon King pondered that his army was still immature and incomplete, but that the brilliance of Demosuke Uchimura would be capable of illuminating all the troops. In the days that had passed, Uchimura could scarcely believe he was working directly for a being known as the Demon King, and moreover serving as a general with his own office. Reviewing the chart of the nation, while small, it seemed well organized. Despite his concerns about not meeting expectations, Uchimura was determined to give his best, especially since the Dark Lord had placed his trust in him, a once mediocre employee. While pondering this, he opened a window and inadvertently let in several demonic bats, letting out a scream of fear. Later, having decided to accept this job, Uchimura implemented some etiquette rules to improve the environment, for instance, getting to know his colleagues better. With this in mind, he went to visit Sylphid's room, but a secretary named Belinda answered and informed him that the Storm Archmage had been out for some time, but that Uchimura's visit would be reported. Despite his initial attempt being thwarted, Uchimura recalled a business world lesson. One must win after losing, so he headed to the next general. However, Ulmandra interrupted him, saying he was being summoned by the Demon King for a new task. Arriving there, the human discovered he was to form an alliance with the Ogre clan. According to the Demon King, the demonic army was still a growing force and needed to collaborate with semi-human clans in the region to match larger forces, including the ogres. This faction had a strength comparable to the demons, and its leader acted dominantly toward the neighbors. Because of this, the ogres were wary of the demons and had imposed information control in recent years, complicating matters. Ideally, an alliance would be great, but there was also a chance the ogres would be hostile, and everything could fall apart. According to the Demon King in Uchimura's world, this would be called negotiating an alliance with a competitor. Speaking of the human, the king believed that only he could accomplish this task. With that said, Ulmandra realized she had no choice but to guide the overseas manager on this journey, making it clear, albeit not entirely honestly, that she would be worried if it weren't for Uchimura's involvement. Later, she emphasized that the two would work together again as great generals. Speaking of which, the man wished he could talk to Gnome about this negotiation, as she led the semi-human forces and could provide valuable information about the ogres. As Ulmandra saw the semi-humans, she refused to accompany her colleague and argued that she would check the carriage. According to Uchimura, it was better for them to divide the tasks to advance things, though it seemed the demoness was merely jealous. Subsequently, Uchimura watched the semi-humans train and was impressed. After the leader interrupted the exercise, she informed the soldiers that their precision with the bow and spear had improved. Then she ordered an officer to provide a well-deserved rest for the subordinates. Uchimura hadn't expected the morale of these troops to be so high, nor that the Earth Crust Barrier would be such a talented commander. Meanwhile, Gnome approached and asked the purpose of the overseas manager's visit. He explained about the negotiation mission with the Ogre clan, and the semi-human mentioned their leader was named Ogier and was a tricky opponent. Known for his bravery and audacity, he was seen as a dictator by enemies. As for the rest, the girl preferred that the human see for himself. Aside from that, Gnome demanded that Ulmandra be kept away from her, as she was exuding an annoying hatred. Unaware that the demoness was right behind him, Uchimura got a shock. Meanwhile, the Hell Aggressor mentioned she was just concerned about her traveling companion and had come to call him since everything was ready for departure and he was taking his time. Out of patience, Gnome ordered Uchimura to leave with that thing, further irritating Ulmandra. As he listened to the argument between the two, Uchimura reflected on their troubled relationship. After the journey, the dude sent by the Demon King ended up waiting at the entrance to the Ogre's castle, to the point Ulmandra grew impatient and demanded quicker action. However, the guards made it clear they could only allow the visitors in with the chief's permission, even though they were two of the four greats. Reflecting on this, Uchimura mentioned that making the other wait was a common tactic to unsettle the opponent, so it was better for her to stay calm. Nonetheless, the demoness was in no mood to play it cool and wasn't afraid to radiate hatred, with her vast power surrounding her body, which frightened the ogres. However, a local representative arrived, apologized for the delay, and invited the visitors inside. Once inside, Uchimura carefully observed his surroundings and analyzed every detail to gather valuable clues for conducting the conversation. Yet Ulmandra asked him not to look around too much, as it could show weakness. After all, the ogres were extraordinary beings, their strength comparable to the Demon Lord's army. But Uchimura knew the biggest problem. Indeed, the man knew. According to Gnome, Ogier, the ogre chief, was a complicated individual. Finally, the guide led the foreigners to a massive gate. As the door opened, the human let a drop of sweat fall as the anxiety of not knowing exactly what he was dealing with was overwhelming. Then they met the local clan leader. Ulmandra began speaking about the purpose of their arrival, but Ogre ordered her to speak only when given permission. Knowing his colleague had a short fuse, Uchimura noticed she was making a great effort to control herself after that rebuff. Eventually, Ogre asked if the demons had come to surrender to the ogres. If so, the only condition was that the head of the demon lord be brought. Hearing this challenge, the Hell Aggressor almost lost her cool, but Uchimura held her wrist and asked for time to consider the proposal. Afterward, he withdrew with his companion. Far from Ogre, the girl exploded to vent the anger she felt. However, Uchimura explained that the ogre's intention was to irritate both of them and end the negotiations without causing unnecessary conflicts. By aggravating Ulmandra, Ogre aimed to pin the blame on the negotiators if the talks didn't go well. Although upset by the insult, Uchimura knew he could not always express his anger, as it would disadvantage the Demon King in the negotiations. Ogre would use the demonic negotiators' poor behavior to ally with other nations and attack the demon army. Considering there wasn't even proper space to talk, the human decided to retreat for the time being. Either way, neither Uchimura nor Ulmandra knew exactly how to proceed from now on. At that moment, the earlier guide introduces herself as Olulu, Ogre's daughter. Despite Ulmandra's suspicion, Olulu wishes for the visitors to dethrone her father. Having said that, she leads them to the castle's food storage, which was empty. According to her, the ogres used to wield great influence over neighboring clans, but now they are facing severe financial issues. But Uchimura confesses he had suspected as much as he noticed upon arrival that the soldiers' equipment was in poor condition and the entire castle was dim and lifeless. It is a common sight in companies on the brink of bankruptcy. When one person decides the course of everything, decisions may be made quickly, but this isn't always the best option for financial health. Ululu says that's what's happening here, and the only way to rebuild the ogre clan is with help from the demon army, but her father won't listen. Besides, she reveals with tears in her eyes that he is ill and the control of information is due to this. However, if Ogre dies suddenly, the problem will be even greater. Uchimura understands the girl's concern but says it's very reckless to reveal internal matters of her clan so freely. About this, the ogress claims she trusts her ability to judge others' character, and the way she spoke made Ulmandra feel jealous again. With that, Olulu asks the human to marry her and become the new clan chief, as it's the only way to change the clan's course. Unable to show his anger, Ulmandra asks for some time for them to think. Subsequently, Uchimura takes some time alone to reflect on all these matters. At that moment, his eye once again emits the sign from the same bar as before, and that's where he appears immediately after. By his side, Ulmandra was saying that the lion is the strongest wild animal, and the master insists it's the gorillas. Either way, Ulmandra believes a group of lions symbolizes pride. Upon hearing her talk about group and pride, Uchimura comes to a conclusion. Thus, the man returns to the real world, straightens his tie, and promises to resolve the case. The next morning, he meets with his travel partner to report that he has made progress in the negotiations. The plan was to meet the ogre clan soon. However, the human intends to take Ulmandra to another place. If all goes well, he will manage to have the negotiation session conducted by the chief himself. A week later, they meet with Ogre, who tells them to stop this charade because all he wants to know is why the other races have joined the Demon King's army. Upon hearing the question, Uchimura gives a small smile of satisfaction. That day, he told his partner he would recruit clans from the other races before Ogre, because previously they had Ogre support, but not anymore. Therefore, it should not be too difficult to annex the neighboring territory of the Ogre clan. Uchimura calls this strategy Operation Fortress of Large Enterprises. Reflecting on the current moment, Uchimura notes he used the same tactic a long time ago when trying to secure a contract with a large company. According to him, if you approach a large company at the front gate like a brute, they will kick you out. That's why Uchimura approached small and medium-sized companies first and offered his products to them. After that, the big companies started buying because they couldn't allow the smaller ones to have innovative products alone. In other words, if the semi-humans around joined the demons, the ogre chief could never ignore them. Keeping this in mind, the human argues that the neighbors were having trouble with expenses, and that a union with the Demon King ensures a minimum standard of living. Ogre gets even more irritated and declares himself the lord of these lands, and that's exactly what Uchimura wants, to see the leader of the ogres lose his reason, because he who loses control loses the negotiation. To escalate the intensity, the man reveals that Olulu was a protagonist in the negotiations with the neighbors. Soon after, the ogress argues that the only way out of the hole was with the help of the demon army. Crying, she says she has always admired her father's strength, but the warrior known as Ogre the Invincible is now old and sick. At that time, Uchimura proposes an alliance, not an annexation. That is, an equal partnership for both sides. The foreign manager knows it's the same thing, as the Demon King guarantees autonomy to the annexed territories, but the way of speaking makes all the difference when dealing with a proud leader like Ogre. Thus, the leader of the ogres asks for time to think. Then the negotiators leave, and watching his daughter depart, the ogre smiles and agrees alone that times have changed. A few days later, Ulmandra informs that Ogre has reached out to make a deal. However, Uchimura was focused on something else, as the Demon King had told him to appoint a subordinate, but the young man has no idea whom to choose since it cannot be Ulmandra herself. The demoness is pleased to hear this, while Ululu arrives as her clan's representative to formalize the alliance with the Demon King. After Uchimura's departure, Ogre began to pass management tasks to the most competent members of the clan, and since then, everything has improved. For that reason, Ululu would do anything for the human as a thank you. Soon after, Uchimura invites the ogress to work with him. Following this, he analyzes that the demon army has grown considerably, but that every great return comes with a great risk. The following day, Uchimura was deeply engrossed in his work, devising ways to enhance efficiency on certain military matters. Suddenly, Ulmandra entered his office to announce that the negotiations with the Bear tribe had been a success. Now, it was up to the foreign manager to organize the terms for each side to finalize the agreement. Reflecting on this, Uchimura recalled endless meetings where those terms never seemed to clarify, but it appeared those days had changed. Ulmandra had also heard that Uchimura's efforts to facilitate an alliance between the demonic army and the ogres would be rewarded in a ceremony, the details of which she would provide after lunch. Surprised by this news, Uchimura mused that he had never received as much as a ham sandwich above his salary at his old job. Speaking of the perks of his new role, lunch was delivered to his office by none other than the Hell Aggressor herself. However, the gym porridge served was quite bland, according to Uchimura. Ulmandra admitted she had diluted the porridge with water to make it stretch further, leaving him quite frustrated. He reflected that Jim, a type of grain grown on the farmlands around the city, and thanks to Ululu, who was well-versed in royal studies and diplomacy, Uchimura was learning about this new world. Ultimately, the military ration from the demonic army was just a poor Jim porridge, something he understood, but truthfully, he missed having meat. Sensing his friend's frustration, even though he hadn't voiced it, Ulmandra assured him she understood his plight and invited him to go hunting. More precisely, when they reached the forest, the general informed that the army had received a mission to exterminate magical beasts in the area. Among the demi-humans living there, 5 orcs had been entirely devoured. But Uchimura panicked, while the demon explained that the strong feed on the weak. That was the law of nature. Normally, orcs would find a way to defeat these magical beasts on their own, but this time, the enemy was too strong. Considering the gym porridge needed to be diluted to stretch, Uchimura imagined the orcs were not fully healthy and well-fed, especially with this magical beast disaster. Undoubtedly, this world was as problematic as the human's original one. Interrupting his thoughts, Ulmandra shouted that she had found an edible mushroom that the orcs had been collecting when attacked. This mushroom was considered a very precious ingredient in the region. Seizing the moment, Ulmandra planned to wait for a magical boar to appear on its own. It wasn't long before the giant beast emerged with its red eyes and sharp tusks. Ulmandra ordered Uchimura to slowly back away while she handled the problem. Then, with a devastating spinning kick, she struck the animal's head squarely. Uchimura considered that boars lacked a concept of three-dimensional space. They could only perceive what was directly ahead, behind, or beside them. With an overhead attack, Ulmandra left the creature without a response. However, the boar recovered from the blow and flung several rocks with its tusks at the enemy, who dodged the projectiles with her vast agility and landed a punch on its ribcage. To be capable of such force, Uchimura noted that the Hell Aggressor also needed to be a monster, but still the difference in resilience between them was surreal, and the demon lacked the decisive power to end the fight outright. After all, wild beasts like boars use their tusks and claws to threaten their prey, but humanoids like Uchimura and Ulmandra were fragile animals with very low killing ability. That's why humans had always needed external weapons like swords, shields, grenades, and rifles as a way to compensate for their lack of natural strength. In Uchimura's mind, Ulmandra was well aware of this, which is why he couldn't understand why she hadn't brought any weapon for such a lousy hunt. Meanwhile, the Hell Aggressor realized she couldn't defeat the boar this way, so she would have to reveal some of her true skills. As the body takes time to recover from such techniques, the demon always avoided using them, but there was no other way in this fight. As the boar charged at the enemy, she considered that if she opened the abdomen and damaged the stomach, the boar would be inimitable, so she grabbed its tusk and exterminated the animal with a type of reddish energy. Terrified, Uchimura wondered if this was the magic of a demon, while Ulmandra invited him to eat a boar, though the poor guy had lost his appetite after witnessing the disturbing scene. Later, the general of the demonic army received thanks from the local demi-humans, while Uchimura realized that these people were just like the boar and felt even more disturbed. A resident handed Ulmandra the boar's leg to cook and start the feast, and Uchimura regained his happiness knowing he would finally have meat in his belly. Thus, the general grilled the beast with her fire, but as she was preparing the second thigh, she simply carbonized the piece with fur and all. Uchimura complained that this wasn't much to his taste, but the woman insisted he eat it. When the human reluctantly bit into it, the bitterness of the meat juice spread across his tongue like gasoline, and he complained to his colleague for forcing him to eat such crap. In response, Ulmandra retorted that this guy complained about every meal he received, so Uchimura realized that the cultural difference between humans and demons might lead him to deep indigestion. To reverse the situation, he asked a resident if everyone could use the stove, but the demi-human regretted to inform that salt was running out, which could ruin the feast. Thus, Uchimura rolled up his sleeves and requested just a bit of salt and edible mushrooms to solve the issue. Sometime later, he served the village grilled wild boar on a skewer and wild boar mushroom soup. When Ulmandra tasted it, she was absolutely enchanted by the incredible flavor. Meanwhile, as the villagers enjoyed the meal, Uchimura reflected that pigs tend to smell gamey, so after the scent faded, he soaked the meat in water to draw out the blood. Since pork is rich in fat, it's important to keep the meat far enough from the fire to not burn it, but melt away the excess fat. The same goes for when you want to add meat to a soup. Blanching the meat a bit removes the odor. Moreover, Uchimura offered to teach the villagers how to cook this way if they wished. In Ulmandra's view, such a gesture might tarnish the reputation of the four great ones, but he thought the opposite. Just by observing dietary habits, one can predict the development of an entire civilization. For this tribe, if they had a way to prepare meat properly, it could evolve. The demoness recognized that this village was weak and struggled with food shortages, and that needed to change. When night fell, the Hell Aggressor summoned her companion to head home. To light their path and keep enemies at bay, she conjured a fireball that only demons could wield with their omniscience. Reflecting on this, Uchimura thought about how, unable to use magic, the demi-humans led by the Gnome needed to train day and night to compensate for this absence. By the way, he asked if Sylphid was a demon or a demi-human. Although she wasn't sure, based on the title Conjurer of the Final Storm, Ulmandra believed he was also a demon, although he never showed up at the meetings in person. Later, as the two made their way, Uchimura suggested that Ulmandra also use weapons since the magic she employed took time to recover, a difficulty evident in their fight against the wild boar. In other words, fighting without a weapon is like protecting yourself from the cold without proper clothes. Ultimately, it's important to consider a coat. Hearing this, the demonist extinguished the fire and admitted that the foreign manager might be right, but his comment was an insult to her. Because of this, she changed plans and ordered the human to stay in the village to be escorted back to the castle in the morning. After all, the general had begun to trust the human, but unfortunately, he was still just a man from another world whose focus on efficiency didn't mesh well with the demons. After saying this, the Hell Aggressor flew off and left the man alone in the forest, so he ran back to the village to avoid any surprises. The next day, after Uchimura reintroduced himself to the leader, the Demon King praised the work of his human general, but noted that he had returned only now, while Ulmandra had arrived the previous night. Then in tears, the man cried out that he did not deserve to be one of the four great ones. Faced with the situation, the king ordered the man to resolve his issue with the demoness, and that this was not just a personal discussion between the two, but also a way for Uchimura to better understand the world he was part of. After the meeting, Uchimura tried to understand why Ulmandra had been so upset. Considering that the two most prominent races in this kingdom were demons and demi-humans, his initial impression was that demons were more intellectual, while demi-humans like orcs were more savage. However, taking Ulmandra as an example, the human reflected that she demonstrated just the opposite due to her habits and way of dressing. According to Uchimura, the way a people dress reflects their era, culture, religion, and way of thinking. In the case of demons, they rely heavily on magic to define themselves as individuals, while other races are not capable of doing the same. With this in mind, Uchimura concluded that he needed to discard his prejudices to thoroughly study how this society functions. For this, he picked up a book that said, for demons, having a sculptural body is a matter of honor to evolve their spell-casting ability. The more the body is trained, the stronger the magic becomes, and that's why demons dress in clothes that expose their bodies more, as a way to display their honor and magical power. In summary, Uchimura had made that comparison to Ulmandra about wearing proper clothes for the cold, which might sound offensive in her culture. Speaking of her, the demoness went straight to cry her woes to Olulu, saying that Uchimura hated her body. Then the ogress explained to the demoness the cultural difference between them and the human, as he did not see body exposure as something positive. In fact, he might think that demons are perverts for it. Seeing that the demoness was literally burying her head in the ground because of this and wanted to know what to do, Olulu recalled her first day as a subordinate to Chimera. He had said that she should feel free to discuss anything she wanted with him openly, as together they could find a solution to everything. Meanwhile, Uchimura was at his favorite bar, but this time other humans were present, all dressed in office uniforms like him. The guy was enjoying his steak and grilled meat with pepper, until the bar owner smiled and commented that this food was the specialty of the house. As this was the first time he had seen this man smiling, Uchimura had an idea. Thus, the two met hastily after understanding what they had to do. First, the human admitted that he found the demoness's body extremely sexy, and she responded that she wasn't perverted and just wanted to hear him praising her body. After realizing what they had just said, they were embarrassed. Then Uchimura bowed to apologize. Similarly, Ulmandra also bowed to apologize for having imposed her ideas in the conversation and leaving the man alone in the forest on impulse. Honestly, Uchimura confessed that he felt his life was in grave danger at that moment. However, he stressed that the important thing was that they sought to learn more about each other to reach a solution, and because of this, he believed that the two could be great companions. Ulmandra didn't quite understand if the guy meant something with ulterior motives, but she ended up confirming. With that, Uchimura was relieved to be able to work more peacefully, without a messed up environment in the castle. After that, the Demon King gathered his subjects and allies to announce that following the alliance with the ogres and the integration of the 7 tribes, the demonic army had grown even stronger. For this reason, the leader wanted to congratulate Denosuke Uchimura for his incredible performance in such a short period. To reward his merits, the Dark Lord gave a magical stone to the general. However, although grateful, Uchimura claimed he couldn't have achieved any of this without the help of Ulmandra, so he offered the stone to the demoness and sought her favor. Watching the scene, Olulu reflected that giving someone of the opposite sex such an item is considered a marriage proposal in demonic culture. Meanwhile, an unknown demoness spied on the scene from afar and concluded that a loser like Uchimura had gained recognition. Guys, the source will be in the description, and also my brother and I created a manhwa channel. The link will be there along with the source. Check out the channel, and if you like it, please subscribe. See you.